is Thursday, the 8th of February, 2018, and you're listening to Skeptics with a K, the podcast for science, reason, and critical thinking. Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptic Society, a non-profit organisation for the promotion of cucks and social justice warriors, apparently. I am your host, Mike Hall. With me today is Marsh.
Hello.
And it's Alice.
Hello.
I'm away in London this week, so we are recording the show a little bit early. Which means we're round at your place today, Marsh, recording.
Yeah, we're in my house again. I've got some fancy biscuits.
They are fancy biscuits.
We talk a lot about biscuits on this show.
More though than
and people ask us to talk about it more.
Yeah, the more that we talk about it, the more people are like, oh, carry on the biscuit chat. We should just, segue fully. Pivot into a full-time biscuit chat.
A special MSS podcast just on biscuits.
Just on biscuits.
Yeah, or just turn this show into a biscuit show. That sometimes does skepticism. We're diversifying skepticism. So I've got some fancy Belgian biscuits that I got bought from...
These ones just the wafery, vanilla-y wafery things.
Yeah, it's like a circular vanilla-y wafer type thing that looks like a cigar, but it's hollow.
Eat it close to the
don't eat it into the microphone.
No,
there'll be trouble.
Well away from the microphone.
There will be hell to pay if we eat it into the microphone.
Fancy Belgian biscuits. I don't know how Belgian these biscuits are, in fact.
Let's try this one.
They're only from Marks and Spencer's, which is not particularly Belgian. And we might even have Belgian listeners who might poo-poo this entire biscuit selection. And if they did poo-poo it, they'd poo-poo both in French and Flemish.
Just got a B on it.
It says on the list. It says the Belgian Connection.
Belgian collection. Yeah.
But yeah,
it doesn't tell you what's Belgian about it.
It's good. We got an email recently from Derek who asked us about biscuits. Where actually he said he asked about common candy items that they have in the United States and wondering if we have these things in the United Kingdom as well. So he gives a short list. He said, do you have Oreos?
Yeah.
Yes, but only recently.
It's a fairly recent thing. But
comparatively recently.
They've become very popular very quickly.
Yeah. They're a transplant from America that happened since we got a lot of American culture in. Yeah. It's not like a 1950s Oreos came over.
So yeah, we do have Oreos, and Oreos. The people who own Oreos, because I think Oreos are owned by Hershey's, and Hershey's recently bought Cadbury's a few years ago.
Yes,
and so suddenly we've got a collision of a load of
and changed it to Cadbury.
Did they?
Yeah, if you get a caramel, it's now a Cadbury caramel, not a Cadbury's caramel.
Not a Cadbury's caramel.
They've taken the apostrophe S off. I don't know why that is.
Okay. But we got a lot of...
it no longer belongs to Cadbury.
We've got a collision of Cadbury stuff with Hershey stuff, so we get like Oreo-flavoured dairy milks and things like that now, which is a bit peculiar. But yeah, we have Oreos. Hershey bars, we have those. Again, they tried to launch those a few times and never really...
They don't take off well in the UK because they don't taste of chocolate.
A Hershey bar is like a cereal bar, isn't it? In that you go to a place in some hipster area of town, they've got loads and loads of different types of Hershey's chocolate there. You sit there, you eat lots of them in that establishment.
And Hershey's Kisses, we get those too. Although I think I'm right in saying that they're not marketed as chocolate here, they're marketed as chocolate-flavoured candy.
Right.
Because there's not
enough...
They
don't taste of chocolate?
Yeah. I've never seen one in my life. What are they like?
They look like little turds.
Yeah, they look like little dog poos.
Why are they called kisses?
Wrapped
Who's
in
kissing
foil.
turds?
Hershey, apparently.
Hershey. God, Hershey's a pervert.
When he's not writing Tintin. No, that's Hershey.
That's Hershey.
They genuinely look like little foil-wrapped turds.
I mean, at the moment, they look like little minarets.
There was a phase recently in design, around the time iOS 7 came out, where everything went flat.
Yes.
Everything went flat. We got rid of bevels, we got rid of gradients, and everything kind of went flat design. And a lot of brands redesigned their brands to be flat design around the same time. And Hershey redesigned their logo from the kind of stylized Hershey's Kiss that they had to a flat design Hershey's Kiss, which just looked like a steaming turd. It literally just looked like a steaming pile of poo, where the wrapper at the top of the Hershey
steam drifting off.
Looked like the steam drifting on the top of this off the top of this thing, which was a disgrace.
So we do have them, but I've never seen them. So they're not particularly
They're not
big
super
here, really.
common, no. I don't think many British people like Hershey's chocolate. It's very... It's totally different.
It's very, very different to the chocolate that we get normally. Because we're raised on Cadbury's chocolate generally, which is
sweet.
Cadbury chocolate.
Very, very sweet and very, very creamy because very, very milky milk chocolate. Kit Kats, do we have Kit Kats? I think Kit Kats are British.
They're Nestle.
I think before Nestle they were Roundtrees.
Oh, Roundtrees, I see.
They're also vile.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Kit Kats. The last time I had a Kit Kat was a matcha Kit Kat brought back from Japan, which tastes just like normal Kit Kats but are green. Bit of a waste of money, all told. We don't tend to eat them because they're Nestle, and Nicola boycotts Nestle stuff.
Well, they were created by Roundtrees in York.
Well,
the Roundtrees factory is from York.
Yeah, so
Kit Kat actually
a proper British
Do they not come foil wrapped anymore? They used to come wrapped in a little bit of foil and then a wrap around on them as well.
Foil lined plastic now on a Kit Kat.
I wonder why that is. Is that an economy thing? I'm not sure.
And I know Lana's son, Christmas time, got himself a Kit Kat. Just took a bite.
If it was a 2-finger, then I'd totally understand biting that.
I mean, no, you're meant to dismantle a Kit Kat. That's what it's for.
I'd go straight down a 2-finger one because pulling it in half isn't worth it. Whereas a 4-finger one, it's wider than your mouth, so it's not a comfortable bite. You wouldn't do that with a Twix.
I don't think I've eaten a Kit Kat since I was a kid because they're horrible.
What's wrong with a Kit Kat? Not even a chunky?
I don't like wafer.
No, I suppose.
I don't. Having just eaten a wafer thing, I don't like that kind of the wafer that's in grids.
Like a pink wafer.
Like a pink wafer. I fucking hate pink wafers. They're vile. They're so sickly.
Twix, he says, do we have a Twix here? And we've talked about the Twix extensively on the show.
We have many years ago now.
A long time ago, we did the Twix conversation.
Because I pointed out that each of the bar is called a twee. And the Twix is named after the gap down the middle, which is the gap twixt.
Betwixt, short for betwixt.
It is short for betwixt.
That's what it used to be. Apostrophe Twix until the Americans got their hand on it, stripped the apostrophe out.
They do that a lot. It's terrible.
I don't know why that would happen. Reese's cups, Reese's peanut butter cups. We have those.
I think that's again, the last decade.
That's quite a new one.
No, I don't think so. I think they've been around on and off for a long time, but they've recently had they're recently fashionable again.
Yeah. It left a lot of kids confused in the 80s watching E.T. without a fucking idea what Reese's Pieces were.
Yeah.
We had no idea. In fact, I think I'm right in saying that some international versions of E.T. were dubbed with a different chocolate bar.
You're not thinking of Mac and Me?
I might be Mac and Me.
Because people didn't just easily Google things then.
No. I know Demolition Man, international versions of Demolition Man had all the references to Taco Bell taken out and replaced with Pizza Hut.
Pizza Hut, yes, I remember that, yeah. My favourite thing about a Reese's Pieces is you can buy a Ben & Jerry's ice cream with a Reese's Pieces in.
Right.
And so we do that from time to time, and Nicola had one, and she talked about how she really likes Reese's Pieces, but she had a Reese's Piece in her mouth at the time. And so it distorted the way she was talking. So she said, I really like Reese's Pieces. And now it sounds like she said Reese's Pieces. So occasionally I'll refer to Reese's Pieces as a Reese's Piece.
Reese's Pieces. And do we have Snickers? Do we have Snickers bars? Which we do have Snickers bars, but they're called marathons.
They aren't called marathons.
They haven't been for a very long time.
I don't think they were called marathons while you've been alive, have they, Alice?
I think I remember them changing the name.
It would have been early 90s, if not late 80s. So just for sort of context for international listeners, is we invented the marathon bar, as far as I'm aware. Mars, I think, is a British company.
Is it?
We invented it. It was called a marathon bar. And
changed in 1990, so I don't recall
remember
a marathon bar, but I do remember Opal Fruits. Starburst being called Opal Fruits.
That's not the same question at all. That's excited, but I do remember Sif.
No, but they were changed in the early 90s.
And it's a similar story. So
Opal Fruits. I think late 90s Opal Fruits.
Opal Fruits were
97, I'm going to say.
Opal Fruits were what are known internationally as Starburst.
Yeah.
Again, I think I'm correct in saying, and I might be wrong about this, but they were invented in the UK and marketed as Opal Fruits, as was the Marathon was invented in the UK, marketed as Marathon. And then internationally, Marathon was marketed as Snickers, and Opal Fruits were marketed as Starburst, and then they retrofitted the international name back into the UK market. So now we have Starburst and Snickers, even though they were originally Opal Fruits and Marathon.
Go on, Alice.
1998.
1998.
98 for an Opal Fruit.
That wasn't bad.
Excellent.
Wasn't there was something else that went around that changed its name around the same time, but I think it's something way more obscure.
It was Jif. Jif turned to Sif.
There was Jif turned to Sif.
I would not have paid attention to that in the 90s.
You might have done. It was all over. And the reason for that was that across Europe, the J sound isn't pronounced as a hard J, so you were sort of selling it in other countries and put it in a J and it was a hif. Yeah. So that makes no sense. So it was called Sif elsewhere, which is ironic because here we wouldn't necessarily always pronounce the C as a soft C, so you go, oh, kif.
Kif.
Yeah.
So like, if you're going to change something, you've missed you've fallen between two stools.
I don't know if Opal Fruits count as one of your 5 a day.
I don't think they will do.
Do you not think so?
I don't like an Opal Fruit.
But they're made to make your mouth
chewy
water.
Sweets
I don't like things that are made to make my mouth water. I don't think I like stuff that's chewy.
I prefer chewy sweets. Like
I don't trust why it's chewy.
prefer sweets to chocolate. I wouldn't tend to eat
Chocolates
chocolatey.
are sweets. Chocolate is sweet. This is a ridiculous conversation we've had previously.
I mean, sweet tea is sweet, but you wouldn't say it was sweet.
That's a liquid.
Pancakes are sweet. You wouldn't call them sweets.
That's a dessert.
No, it's not. It's a breakfast.
Well, it's also a breakfast.
Arguably.
Okay, it's a breakfast.
Donuts.
Donuts might be in the sweets category.
Donuts are not sweet.
Well, I think sweets are anything that comes.
Sweets are
wrapped.
candy.
Anything that is a sugary snack that comes wrapped in a wrapper.
So a fig roll.
Yeah, but that's a grandparent sweet. That's the kind of sweet that your grandparents
sweet.
offer. Actually, I think fig roll is in the biscuit is in that borderline biscuit territory. But I think it's the kind of thing that
at least my categorization is really clear. Sweets that are like jelly, sweetie, candy things are sweets, and anything else is described by what it is: chocolate, biscuits.
I wouldn't say biscuits are sweets. Well, what would you go with fig roll?
I would call it a biscuit because I wouldn't put it in I don't put all sweet things.
Element.
I don't put all sweet things in the sweets category.
Nor do I. Cakes are sweets. No, they're not. Cakes aren't sweets. Biscuits aren't sweets.
You don't even know what you call things.
Cakes aren't sweets. Biscuits are sweets.
I'm consistent in my categorization.
I'm consistent in mine. You show me something, I can tell you if it's a sweet or not.
I think we have found the fundamental flaw in naive set theory. So, one other thing that Derek asks us is about the word tea. He says, because Derek's from the United States, he says, here when we say tea, we mean a specific drink, usually served cold with sugar added in the South.
I mean, they're wrong already.
That is true. Tea should not be served cold.
That's an iced tea.
However, I cannot understand how it works there. Sometimes you reference it like you're talking about the drink, hot with cream or milk. I mean, cream teas...
certainly not with cream.
Yeah, it's a bit decadent, cream tea.
You put cream in tea?
I would rarely do a cream tea.
You put cream in coffee. A cream tea is something totally different. A cream tea is like scones and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that's a linguistic confusion there. Could you put cream in coffee?
Yeah.
You put cream in coffee, you don't put cream in tea.
Cream in tea would be weird. But at other times, it seems like you mean the food period of time that we would call dinner, brackets the one after lunch. Is it context dependent or even consistent? And no, it's not consistent.
I'd say it is context dependent.
I think it's consistent and context dependent, just not everybody uses one of those terms.
Isn't that the definition of not consistent when not everybody uses it the same?
It consistently means an evening meal.
It does.
Or a hot drink.
Yes.
It always means one of those two things, but just not everybody uses one of those words.
Okay, that's reasonable.
Yeah,
that's reasonable.
So it is context dependent. It is consistent, but it's also an element of
it's not
dialect. It's dialectical.
Yeah.
Yes. So I would normally, growing up, I'd call your evening meal tea.
Yes, so would I.
And your lunchtime meal dinner.
Yes.
Which is even more confusing. I think the etymology of the meal tea, I'm just sort of slightly looking it up, is the evening meal originally from high tea.
Yeah.
And then afternoon tea. And so that places it in the food you eat, not at lunchtime.
I'm not sure how many American listeners would have any concept of what high tea would be. It's a very English thing, and it's not a very common English thing anymore.
Yeah.
The only time I ever have high tea is at my nana's house.
Yeah.
And it is a very specific thing that I don't even think most British people would agree on what it means.
Yeah, well, I'm just looking at Wikipedia here. Tea is evening meal. Apparently tea, also known as high tea or meat tea.
Meat tea.
I've never heard of it called meat tea.
No, nor have I.
No,
I think Wikipedia's making that
But
one.
I would say high tea you would have at 3 o'clock. You wouldn't have any later than 3 o'clock.
Yeah, I mean, they said high tea typically consists of a hot dish followed by cakes and bread or butter and jam. Those are kind of
I
standards.
wouldn't typically have anything with a high tea. The high tea would be like bread and ham and maybe some pastries and some scones. And
the term was first used in 1825, around then, because the high tea is taken from eating on a high dining table, as opposed to on a low table sat around at a coffee table type thing.
So it was a more formal meal. You'd go to the high table.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, contrast of low tea, which is a snack served on a low table, like a coffee table, it'd be called in North America.
Well, when you say it's dialectical, there's very much a north-south divide there, isn't there? In the south, it's most commonly you would have lunch at noon and dinner at in the evening, like 6 p.m.
Yes,
and up north, it would be dinner around noon and tea around 6 p.m.
And this is where the inconsistency comes in. The inconsistency is not with the definition of the word tea, it's with the definition of the word dinner.
Sure, I can see that, yeah.
Because people switch between having dinner at lunchtime, dinner at tea time.
Yeah.
No, I don't know. I don't think... I would switch between saying dinner and lunch for the meal you have around 12, around noon. But I would never, ever say dinner for an evening meal. That seems really weird to me.
Yeah, but people do.
No, people do, but I don't think they switch.
People who well, I switch personally, but people who use, what I'm saying is when Mike was saying the definition for the word tea is inconsistent, people only ever use tea to mean one of two things, a hot drink or an evening meal. People across the board, people use dinner to mean either a lunchtime meal or a tea time meal or the biggest meal of the day.
Yes, yeah. So it's
which is why I use it, which is why I interchange. But it's inconsistent across the population.
Yeah, it's
tea is not
population.
Inconsistent across the population in terms of the definition. It's just inconsistently used across the population.
Yeah, I guess so. But dialectically, it's not inconsistent, apart from maybe you. Because I don't know anybody else.
Well, I'm from the Midlands, so I'm in between the two.
Yeah. But I don't know anyone else ever who would occasionally say...
A lot of people say that it should be defined as the largest meal of the day. That's not totally uncommon. So, I would always call it whatever I have as my largest meal is my dinner. So if I had a massive lunch and
what if you had
a really
massive
small
breakfast?
tea,
what if you ate a fuckload of breakfast?
Well, okay, breakfast is always breakfast, but
what we're saying is
breakfast is what you're saying.
What we're saying is that if you have your dinner at lunchtime, then what you have at tea time is dinner. But if you're having lunch at lunchtime, then at tea time you have tea. No, dinner at tea time you have dinner.
I think you could have because I would have lunch at lunchtime and tea at tea time.
No, madness.
I wouldn't have dinner.
You'll starve, Marsh. You'll starve.
I don't use dinner as a concept anymore. I used to use dinner for lunch, but since I moved further south, as I have further south and a hell of a lot more west, dinner has fallen from my lexicon. Is completely useless to me.
So you just have lunch and tea.
What about supper?
Madness.
What about supper?
Supper.
No one's ever really had. Some people have supper at dinner time or tea time.
Really?
Yeah, that's their evening meal is supper.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a good shot that we can probably come up with some sort of meal that you have at every hour of the day. Like you have breakfast, you have 11s. You can have lunch, you can have afternoon tea, high tea, dinner, supper.
For me, supper is always
this by Tolkien.
Supper is always your after evening meal.
After evening meal?
That's
like a snack you'd have before bed, supper,
exactly.
at most. But some people
So you
would
have it after you've had your main evening meal?
Maybe it's an older thing, supper. Maybe that's not current. But
for me, supper is like cheese and crackers before I go to bed.
It's all a bit wee willy winky supper, though, isn't it? It's a bit...
Come and get you a supper. I don't know what that was accent-wise, actually. No, I think, maybe sort of 60 years ago, maybe a sort of a middle class 60 years ago might have called it supper.
Yeah.
Not just middle class. My nana calls it supper, and she was very working class.
For like an evening meal would be supper?
Not for the evening meal. After your evening meal.
The snack you have before bed, universally would be supper, I'd say. But there are people who would call your evening meal supper.
Yeah, so dinner is supper.
That, I think, is maybe a middle class to upper class thing 60 plus years ago.
Maybe, yeah.
So I hope that's left you suitably confused. It's perfectly straightforward when you grow up here.
This is a function of having so many diffuse dialects packed into such a geographically indiffuse area, and also having had many, many centuries to develop those dialects. Because obviously America, the predominantly English language area of America, has only been there for, 200-300 years, something like that. I'm not very good at American history, like sort of that kind of era. And the people who'd lived there for centuries before that are no longer in possession of the majority of the land, and their language and culture isn't dominant. So you haven't had as long for those languages, the English language, to kind of fester and grow and spin off into different areas.
Yeah.
And you've also got too few people in too large an area that it can't develop that quickly either. Whereas here, you can drive from Liverpool to Manchester. It's a 40-minute drive, and you'll go through 9 distinct dialects.
Yeah,
you'll go through your various of Scouse into Knowsley, into St Helens, into Warrington.
Yeah,
you go through lots of different different languages and dialects. You don't really get that in America. You can drive for a day in Texas and still find people with a relatively similar Texan accent.
Mm-hmm.
Prostate cancer is now a bigger killer than breast cancer. One man dies every 45 minutes from the disease as research lags 10 years behind other forms, says the Daily Mail. The Telegraph said prostate cancer kills more people than breast cancer for the first time, new figures reveal. The BBC said prostate cancer deaths overtake those from breast cancer. The Sun said League of Death Prostate cancer killing more Brits than breast cancer for the first time as funding for treatment lags behind. Twice as much money has been spent researching breast cancer treatment compared to prostate cancer since 2002, and as a result, survival rates for breast cancer patients have improved faster, trying to outwin Daily Mail for the longest headline.
That was all headline.
That was all, well, it was headline and sub-headline.
And those little bullet points that they put underneath.
I didn't do the Daily Mail bullet points, to be fair.
Did you pick up the Daily Mail front page on this? Have you
I haven't seen the front page, no.
It's something like New War on Men.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it.
See if you can find it. Well, I do. I've got a couple more headlines. The Guardian said, prostate cancer now kills more people than breast cancer, UK figures reveal. Male illness now third most common cause of death behind lung and bowel.
So I've now got the Daily Mail's version in front of us. It says, new figures show prostate is now a bigger killer than breast cancer, which gets twice the funding. That's the pre-headline bit. Main headline, front page, is this a case of bias against men?
Because obviously putting money into breast cancer research starts to work, and that means you're biased against men.
That means you're allowing men to die.
I mean, if it helps, the comments on that article included, men are clearly the expendables in modern society.
Oh my God.
Male disposability. I wonder if the feminists will be crying out for equal rights on this, and no one cares about men. Feminists will be popping champagne at this news. I think the last comment was from an Ed Turner in Liverpool. I don't know.
The Daily Mail article begins, prostate cancer has become a bigger killer than breast cancer for the first time, official statistics reveal today. More than 11,800 men a year, or one every 45 minutes, are now killed by the disease in Britain, compared with about 11,400 women dying of breast cancer. It means prostate cancer has overtaken breast cancer as the third biggest cancer killer in the UK, behind only lung and bowel. Despite this, it receives less than half the research funding of breast cancer, while experts warn that treatments for the disease are trailing at least a decade behind. They go on to say that the aging population is the main reason for the increase in prostate cancer deaths, with older men more likely to get an aggressive form, and men are far more likely to ignore symptoms than women.
That was the aging population, not the Asian population.
Aging.
Okay, because I mean, if this was from the Daily Mail, then...
But last night, experts said the gulf in research funding is also driving the disparity. This actually feeds into a complaint we had from a listener, Bill, on our comments about prostate cancer on a recent episode, where he said, he posted on the episode, interesting podcast, but I think the section on prostate cancer was grossly misleading with potentially dangerous false reassurance. The figures below are taken from the Cancer Research UK website, and although the figures are out of date, there is no reason to believe they have changed substantially. In 2014, there were 11,287 deaths from prostate cancer in the UK, compared with 11,433 deaths from breast cancer. The quoted 10-year survival rate, 2011, is 84% for prostate cancer and 78% for breast cancer. I accept entirely that most cases of prostate cancer occur in men over 70, and accept the old saying that old men with cancer of the prostate die of old age. But it certainly does occur in younger men and is often more aggressive in these individuals. Men are often not great at looking after their health, and anything that gives false reassurance and may discourage men from seeking help is just as bad as those who peddle scam treatments. So the episode Bill was referring to was a discussion of a specific treatment that was being tested for treating prostate cancer. And as a side comment, I'd pointed out that the most common cancer in men is prostate cancer. It's usually diagnosed very late in life, and usually the best course of action is to leave it because it's quite slow growing. We then had a bit of a back and forth about the disease, and I acknowledged that we were quite glib about it and certainly simplified the situation since it was a simple aside to the main story. But we did discuss that active watching and doctors keeping an eye on progression that might require treatment was an important part of managing prostate cancer. And we discussed how the disease can become more aggressive and spread to the lymph nodes or bone.
It was something actually that we saw at the Patrick Vickers Gerson lecture, where he said, you know what the treatment is for a 70-year-old man with prostate cancer? It's nothing, they won't do anything. Whereas if you're a 20-year-old man with prostate cancer, they'll try and treat you because it's a real worry. And he used this as evidence that people in their 70s are healthier than people in their 20s, rather than the likelihood of prostate cancer. The growth rate of prostate cancer is usually so slow that in your 70s, something else is likely to kill you before, and the treatment can be more onerous than the risk factors at that age. But if you're younger, then you really should get checked out and stuff.
Well, you should get checked out anyway. And this was kind of the crux of the point, really. So I acknowledge that the way I framed the discussion in my mind was that if you have or suspect you have prostate cancer, then of course you seek medical advice. And if you live with untreated prostate cancer, that's a decision that should be made with the appropriate medical device. It never crossed my mind that a patient with prostate cancer might dismiss it as, oh, prostate cancer isn't that bad, I don't need to see a doctor.
No.
Because my experience of discussing cancer with lay people is the vast majority of the public have such a strong fear of the disease, which I actually think is probably detrimental to them seeking help, which is kind of the point I want to make in this piece. But if that didn't come across in the comments that we made, of course, if patients think that they have symptoms that might be indicative of prostate cancer, you need to know if you're one of the patients who has the aggressive, sure, the aggressive form is not that common, but it still happens, and you need to know if you're one of those patients or whether watching and waiting is okay. But watching and waiting should be done by active monitoring by your doctor.
It probably should go without saying as well that don't take medical advice from a podcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. Yeah, God, yeah.
But the point I kind of want to make with this piece, while I agree that we could have caveated our comments a little bit more clearly and pushed the requirement to seek medical advice from an expert if you have any symptoms that might be indicative of any health problems, I disagree that our comments constituted as false reassurance. And I strongly disagree with Bill's comment that men are often not great at looking after their health, and anything that gives false reassurance and may discourage men from seeking help is just as bad as those who peddle scam treatments. But I'll come back to that in a moment. First, let's go back to the media coverage. From the stories I talked about, it seems quite obvious that this coverage has been incredibly negative, with many outlets giving the impression that we are almost ignoring prostate cancer despite it being really common. With the Daily Mail saying that it has overtaken breast cancer as the third biggest cancer killer in the UK. Despite that, it receives less than half the research funding of breast cancer. So I thought it'd be quite interesting to look at the statistics. When we're talking about mortality rates, one of the most important factors to consider is what this is as a proportion of the whole. Sure, the mortality rates between breast and prostate cancer might be very similar, with 11,800 men per year dying from prostate cancer and 11,400 women per year dying from breast cancer. But if the incidence rates are vastly different, then it's not the raw number that's the most telling, it's the proportion that's the most useful information.
Yeah.
And what's interesting when you look at the statistics is that actually breast and prostate cancer incidence is very similar. 1 in 8 women are diagnosed with breast cancer in their lifetime, with 55,122 diagnosed in 2015. And similarly, 1 in 8 men are diagnosed with prostate cancer in their lifetime, with 47,151 new cases of prostate cancer in the UK in 2015. So the incidence rates is virtually identical, with 1 in 8 men affected with one and 1 in 8 women affected with the other over their lifetime. The peak age of death for each disease is over 90 years old. But we see a big difference in the average deaths per age across the two diseases. Prostate cancer almost exclusively kills men over 45. So I've got some graphs that show the difference between the two diseases, which I'll also describe for listeners. So male deaths from average number of deaths per year for men with prostate cancer, and then below with women with breast cancer.
We can put these in the show notes up on the
We can as well. These
so
are just taken from Cancer Research UK because they're great at cancer statistics. In 2012 to 2014, which is when these graphs are covering, no one under the age of 30 died of prostate cancer. 1 man died in the 30 to 34 age bracket. No one died aged 35 to 39. 2 aged 40 to 44, and then 19 aged 45 to 49, 59 between 50 and 54, 164 aged 55 to 59, 421 in the 60 to 64 bracket, 889 in the 65 to 69 age bracket, and the remainder of the 10,996 prostate cancer deaths occurred in the over 70s. Meanwhile, the earliest breast cancer patient deaths in the same time frame began aged 20 to 24 with 2 patients, 20 aged 25 to 29, 67 aged 30 to 34, increasing within each age bracket to a peak of 1,439 in the 80 to 84 bracket, with a total figure of 11,483 in that time window of 2012 to 2014.
So breast cancer skews a lot younger than, or rather, prostate cancer skews higher.
Exactly,
than,
a lot older
than breast cancer does.
So the distribution of mortality for the two diseases is very different, despite the incidence being pretty similar. But the biggest difference, as the media rightly point out, is how mortality rates have changed over time. So here are two graphs of the rate of deaths per 100,000 for men with prostate cancer and women with breast cancer from 1971 until 2014. Again, men in blue, women in pink.
Nice.
Obviously.
Graphs be graphs. Is there a definition of mortality from? Is it got to be the prostate cancer that kills them?
Yes.
Not just you were hit by a bus, but you also had diagnosed. You were
absolutely,
diagnosed with
and so
prostate cancer.
this is why when you look at these graphs of the mortality in different age brackets, you see for both of them it drops off. The number of patients dying drops off
when you get very high.
Very high because they've already
Exactly.
died from something else.
Exactly. Or the ones who are going to die from it have already died of it earlier.
Exactly, yes. So they also have on the Cancer Research UK website the rates per diagnosed. And this is where I said that the rates are the highest for the peak rate is over 90 for both of them, but that's not the highest number of deaths because there's less patients in that group. So here's the graphs looking at how mortality rates have changed. The rate of deaths per 100,000 for men with prostate cancer and women with breast cancer from 1971 until 2014. And you can see like a really striking difference. In men with prostate cancer, the rate of deaths started to increase in the early 1980s, peaked in the early 1990s, and the rates are only fairly slowly declining to today, to 2014.
A weird spike around about 1983.
Yeah.
83 to 85, where it goes up by a good 5% in the space of 2 years. That's really weird.
I mean, there could be many reasons for that, including, just changes in diagnostic criteria or improved screening or what, there were people dying before that who had prostate cancer, but we didn't know that's what they died of because we changed our diagnosis or screening procedures, etc.
Yeah,
that's supposition, but there's a few reasons why that could be a data artifact rather than a change in the actual rates.
It could also arguably be we got better at stopping other stuff.
Exactly.
And so it was the prostate cancer that started to get them in that time.
Or it could be when they introduced the GMO corn. Could be that as well.
It might be that,
We're going to come back to lifespan in just a second, because I think that's one of the more important points that we need to consider. But yeah, so it's increased in the early 80s, peaked in the early 90s, and it is declining, but it's quite a slow decline. Meanwhile, female mortality rate started at a higher rate in the 70s, with just over 50 per 100,000, compared to just over 35 per 100,000 in the case of prostate cancer. It increased slightly in the late 80s, but has been very steadily declining since then. So the overall prostate cancer mortality rates have increased by 21% since the early 70s, but with a 13% decrease over the last decade. Whereas breast cancer mortality rates have decreased 32%, despite a 14% increase in the 70s and 80s. And the reasons for this are quite clear. Prostate cancer predominantly kills older men, and lifespan has increased by a decade since the early 70s. So if we consider that in 2012 to 2014, nearly 86% of the prostate cancer deaths occurred in the over 70s, and the average lifespan in 1971 was 72.27, then we can see why prostate cancer mortality has increased.
So it's in the Daily Mail front page should be bias against old men. I mean, if you can prove that the most people who die of prostate cancer are also white, this is a perfect Daily Mail headline that says, yes, it's society yet again being targeted at white old men.
But it has still decreased by 13% over the last decade, which is no small figure. So an article published on World Cancer Day from Cancer Research UK pointed out that mortality rates across all cancer types decreased by 5% between 2010 and 2015. The four most common cancer types, breast, prostate, lung and bowel, which account for more than half of all cancer cases, have all seen considerable decreases. And their reasoning is this. A better understanding of the genetics of the disease, together with new drugs and surgical techniques, have all contributed to a falling death rate. Research has led to broader uses for drugs such as tamoxifen, as well as the development of newer drugs such as aromatase inhibitors, revolutionizing treatment of breast cancer. Research has helped to inform women and their doctors about the risk factors linked to breast cancer and how to reduce the changes of developing the disease to start with. And knowledge of the signs and symptoms has also helped to get breast cancer diagnosed at an early stage when treatment is usually successful. It's actually the fact that research and information has had such wonderful effects in breast cancer, which led Prostate Cancer UK to trigger this media coverage of the difference between breast cancer and prostate cancer in the first place. So in their article, Prostate Cancer UK say, during that time, breast cancer has benefited from a screening programme, significant investments in research and more than double the number of published studies compared to ones for prostate cancer. Despite the alarming figures, the prospects for men with prostate cancer are actually better than ever, with men diagnosed 2.5 times more likely to live for 10 years or more than if they were diagnosed in 1990. Yet, due to mainly an increasing and ageing population, the number of men dying from the disease is growing. They go on to say, our chief executive, Angela Culhane, says it's incredibly encouraging to see the tremendous progress that has been made in breast cancer over recent years, but with half the investment and half the research, it's not surprising that progress in prostate cancer is lagging behind.
You also wonder whether a huge factor in it lagging behind is the awareness of breast cancer, which is there's a huge breast cancer awareness campaign. There's a reasonable sized prostate cancer one that's growing, but it's been on a delay in terms of the length of that campaign going on. And also the fact that women are far more used to going to a doctor when something goes wrong, largely because they have to have other things generally in their life.
Well, actually,
men don't go to doctors and seek help.
It's quite interesting that most of the symptoms for prostate cancer you look at we should leave a link for the symptoms to prostate cancer in the show notes. But a lot of them are related to urination. Now, most women experiencing those symptoms would immediately go to the doctors to get on antibiotics for UTIs, because most women experience multiple UTIs in their lifetime. They predominantly, they affect men as well, but they do affect women more. And basically the only thing you can do is go to the doctors and get antibiotics for them to clear them up. So most women would be on the lookout for symptoms like that anyway and would be getting checked out. Men maybe aren't as in tune to that particular those particular symptoms, but also they tend to be prone not to want to see doctors as well. There's also a thing about screening, which I think I'm going to save for another episode, because we're going to be here forever if I talk about screening now.
All right, but it's an opportunity to talk about cancer again in the future.
I'll do cancer again in the future. The chief executive, Angela Culhane, also said, this good news is that many of these developments could be applied to prostate cancer, and we're confident that with the right funding, we can dramatically reduce deaths within the next decade. So you can see the article from Prostate Cancer UK is far more positive and much more measured. And for me, this is the important distinction and brings me back to my disagreement with Bill. As a science communicator and cancer researcher, it is my opinion, and let's be clear that it is an opinion, that the fear patients have of the big C discourages them from seeking medical advice about symptoms. Anecdotally, I know plenty of men who dismiss health problems as probably nothing, and I'm sure that some of those dismiss it as nothing in the hope that it is nothing and it will go away. A survey from the National Pharmacy Association in 2012 showed that men visit their GPs a third less often per year than women, and that 90% of men don't like to trouble their doctor. For me, I think the best way to encourage patients to seek medical advice for symptoms is to be positive about the success rates. Knowing the statistics, symptoms and details about prostate cancer will encourage patients to be aware of symptoms and hopefully encourage patients to see a doctor. Knowing that seeing a doctor really is worthwhile, that medically monitoring disease progression doesn't have to be too time-consuming either for patient or doctor, but that it really does save lives is an important thing for patients to be aware of. I actually had a chat with a couple of cancer researchers who I've worked with in the past, and we debated back and forth whether scare tactics are more helpful or positive encouragement is more helpful. And in reality, of course, it depends on the patient. But I do believe that being positive and reassuring, while also being realistic, can encourage patients to engage with a disease that not too long ago people didn't even want to name out loud. People would whisper the word or call it the big C. I believe the media coverage of this positive campaign from Prostate Cancer UK has actually been so negative, taking statistics that they put out in such a positive way, has become really negative in the wider media, and it's potentially very damaging and detracts from the major leaps that we've made in prolonging survival in one of the four most common cancer types. And by dismissing the successes we've had in breast, it's not going to help us with raising funds and raising awareness of prostate cancer.
I was astonished at the negativity, the media coverage around this story. Well, this is a success story.
It's a huge success story. Like by putting research in, by understanding how breast cancer works, by designing new drugs, by raising awareness, and by getting people to get screened and tested and checked, we've had a major win.
Yeah, the numbers are coming down. The numbers are coming down quite significantly
and quickly. In a decade, we've dropped the numbers hugely,
which is brilliant. And instead of being like, look at this amazing success that we've had in breast cancer, let's do the same thing in prostate, it's become this cancer's better than that cancer or worse than that cancer. It's horrendous. Like cancer patients are competitive with each other about how bad their cancers are going to be. It's an absolute disgrace.
The truth is, cancer survival is only ever going to come around from early diagnosis and treatment that suits the progression of the disease. And that's why we need to understand how each disease works and how best to treat it. And if that's a watch and wait, it's not a bad thing to tell patients that watch and wait is the treatment plan, but they need to be hearing that from their doctors.
I'm not a smoker, and I've never been a smoker, and I suspect the same is true for the two of you as well.
I smoked
yes.
for a little while in my teens.
Were you a little crafty smoker?
And then occasionally smoked socially still, despite being a cancer researcher.
Unbelievable.
Very rarely.
More than that, I don't really understand smoking. I don't understand why it's something people would want to do. I don't understand what people get out of it.
I don't understand. So I grew up in a household where both my parents smoked something like 30 a day for the entire duration of my childhood, and both of them still smoke extensively now. And I wouldn't smoke at all for that reason. Just the memories of the light blue fog that filled our living room at all times, and the time at the age of about 9 when they thought I had asthma. And it turns out it was just because my parents smoked so much. And we only didn't find out until years afterwards that it was the fact that my parents smoked constantly around us. Yeah, grim.
My understanding of the science, which is, of course, limited and incomplete, is that as a drug, nicotine doesn't actually do that much for you. It is a stimulant, but mostly what it seems to do is get rid of nicotine cravings, which are obviously not all that relevant to you if you don't already have a nicotine habit. Unfortunately for smokers, as a nicotine delivery platform, inhaling smouldering tobacco leaves has its problems. I once heard it said of cigarettes, they're expensive, they destroy your lungs and they make you smell, but if you have enough of them, you'll really, really like them. And that's before we consider the increased risk of heart disease, stroke, COPD, asthma, gum disease, erectile dysfunction, osteoporosis, and of course, cancer.
There you go, Alice. If you carry on smoking, you'll get erectile dysfunction.
I mean, it is categorically a horrible habit, and it's not an enjoyable habit for most people who smoke, and it's not a healthy habit in any way. There are some certain quirks that smoking does. What some would say are benefits, and part of the reason I picked up occasionally having a cigarette again recently was because I had really bad anxiety, and it does physiologically reduce some of the symptoms of anxiety. So obviously that does not outweigh the bad things, not even slightly, but I also know that I'm not addicted to smoking, so...
But the majority of these complications are not complications of nicotine use per se. They are complications of the chosen method of nicotine delivery, the inhalation of tobacco smoke. And this delivers not just nicotine, but also a host of other chemicals, some of which have some extremely nasty effects. These facts often don't deter smokers, however, partly because of the long-term lobbying of the tobacco industry, which undertook a campaign to undermine the science which demonstrated a link between smoking tobacco and negative health outcomes, but also because people are really bad at trading long-term risk for immediate reward. Yes, I understand that this increases my risk of several cancers and a host of other adverse medical complaints, but that's probably 20 years away, and I really need a fag right now. Now, obviously, there are alternative nicotine delivery platforms which do not come with a suite of bonus harmful chemicals, nicotine gum, nicotine patches, e-cigarettes, and so on. And while most of these are sold as smoking cessation tools aimed at weaning users off a nicotine habit, some of them, especially e-cigarettes, are often used simply to sustain a nicotine habit while avoiding the harmful chemicals associated with burning tobacco leaves.
I remember when e-cigarettes first came out. I think Colin was still on the show, and I think Colin did a whole piece about, because he was a smoker as well.
Yeah, Colin did the first e-cigarette piece. I've kind of inherited the e-cigarette stuff from Colin, because Colin did the first e-cigarette piece on the show, yeah. Mm. And we've talked about e-cigarettes on the show 3 or 4 times before. Each time we've concluded that they are likely to be safer than smoking, just on the basic science alone. And we're still a long way away from the 15 and 20-year long-term studies, because these things need to be done in real time, it turns out. So it takes 20 years to do a 20-year study. Although nicotine itself is nasty stuff, it's better than nasty stuff plus all the bonus crap, which is what you get from cigarettes.
Revolting stuff that it puts into your lungs.
Ideally, we should be avoiding nicotine, but if you already have a nicotine habit, maintaining it through vaping is much safer than maintaining it through burning leaves.
Yeah. Actually, anecdotally, I was talking to my brother about it, because my brother smokes quite a lot.
Oh, really?
But has been vaping for a year and a half, maybe, in conjunction with smoking at first, and then now without smoking in addition. But he was saying recently that he's on the lowest level of nicotine for his particular vape, and then had tried coming off the nicotine entirely and had a really bad relapse and went back onto cigarettes because he'd come off the nicotine too quickly. And so now he's on a low dose of nicotine, and he's actually, the last time I saw him, I didn't see him. Like, he used to vape constantly. I haven't seen him. I didn't see him vape much at all. So
that's one thing that I find really interesting, is that people who move from cigarettes to vaping, it certainly seemed for at least a while, a lot of people I've seen, because there's a social acceptance of vaping that we successfully eradicated with smoking. You couldn't smoke in indoor areas, businesses, that type of stuff. Because there wasn't that kind of rule with vaping, it seemed like people would move from cigarettes onto vaping and then vape constantly.
It seemed,
rather than like, I'd have a fag every hour, but now I'm
vaping all the time.
And that's 10 seconds,
definitely the case with my brother, or was at the beginning. He was vaping near constantly. He vapes a lot of flavoured e-cigarettes, which have a really strong smell. So actually, whenever I see him now, he avoids vaping in the presence of people, because he knows that they find it really unpleasant to smell what he's vaping. So if he's in the family house, he might do it a bit more because he knows his family will put up with it. But if he's in public with people, he's gonna avoid it.
I've actually got some relevant stats to that coming up
nice.
later in the story. But with all that as preamble, we're going to come to this story from the Metro, which Alice sent over to me in the last couple of weeks. Because as well as being the placebo guy and the conspiracy guy, it turns out I'm also the vaping guy. Vaping could cause cancer, scientists warn. Most people slurp away on e-cigarettes thinking they're a safe alternative to fags. But new research suggests nicotine vapor may carry its own risks.
I'm not sure anybody thought that they were a safe alternative to fags.
No.
They were a safer
I agree. Yeah,
alternative to fags. But I remember when they first started to gain popularity, and people were like, "But what if it's evil? What if they're evil? What if this new thing is actually going to give us some other horrific disease?"
I've actually got statistics on that as well. This idea where they say people slurp away on e-cigarettes thinking they're a safe alternative to fags. According to Action on Smoking and Health, fewer than 1% of people that they surveyed believe that e-cigarettes are safe. 49% of current e-cigarette users think they are safer than smoking tobacco, with the remaining 51% being split between e-cigarettes are more harmful than smoking, equally harmful to smoking, don't know, or the handful of people who think they are totally, totally safe. Mm-hmm. So the majority of people by no means think that it's safe. It's like, of the general population, 1% of people surveyed who had heard of an e-cigarette thought it was totally safe.
Yeah.
So no one is really denying that nicotine vapor carries its own risks. Of course it does. This is a straw man from the Metro, right on the first line. The key point is that cigarettes are less harmful, not that they are harm-free. And if your interest is in harm reduction, in fewer adverse events, in fewer people getting sick and dying, then this is a good thing. 120,000 people a year die from smoking-related disease in the UK, with some estimates suggesting that that number could be reduced to just 6,000 if all smokers switch to vaping overnight. So if every smoker in the UK switched to vaping overnight, those figures would come down from 120,000 people a year to 6,000 people a year dying from smoking-related disease. But that isn't where the Metro strawman stops, because their article continues. The findings suggest that a common belief about e-cigarettes, that most of the harm from smoking comes from other compounds, not nicotine, might be wrong. That is complete shit. It is demonstrably the case that most of the harm from smoking comes from compounds other than nicotine.
Yeah, of course.
And has been for a long time.
Nothing in this new research contradicts that at all. The primary role of nicotine in smoking-related disease is that it is highly addictive, and that addiction keeps you inhaling tobacco smoke with all of its associated carcinogens when you otherwise might have stopped, because it's expensive, it destroys your lungs, and it makes you smell. I dug out the original research here, the research that the Metro are apparently quoting from. So what does this research actually say? Now, nicotine is not currently classified as a carcinogen. It doesn't appear on the IARC list, as far as I'm aware. And
that one that tells us that bacon is as bad as cigarettes.
And animal models do not show a direct association between nicotine use and cancer. There's an indirect association between nicotine use and cancer, but that's because of smoking.
Yes,
but there is not a direct association between nicotine use and cancer.
And it's not like people haven't been researching this for quite a while.
Indeed, yeah. Now, this latest research examined the effects of nicotine vapor specifically in e-cigarette smoke on human heart, lung, and bladder cells in vitro, as well as on the heart, lung, and bladders of mouse models.
Bladder?
So it turns out that when you smoke, the majority of the nicotine that you take is metabolized into a compound beginning with C, whose name I don't remember.
Yeah.
But that travels through your blood into your urine and is excreted through that.
That's interesting.
So you get an incidence of bladder cancer with smoking?
Yeah. Now, as far as we're aware, that compound itself isn't carcinogenic, but only about 80% of the nicotine that is absorbed through smoking is converted into that. The remainder is converted into nicotine nitrosamines. If I'm probably mangling the words because I haven't written it down. But other compounds that are nasty as shit, but they will also be excreted through the urine. So yeah, there is an instance of bladder cancer associated with smoking because that's how the nicotine quits your system.
Yes, yeah, and also we're looking at the effect of nicotine here, and not necessarily all the other stuff to do with smoking.
This is about nicotine. Yeah,
tracking nicotine through the body and seeing what effect it has. Okay, that makes sense.
So the researchers found that e-cigarette smoke causes DNA damage in both mouse models and in vitro, and it also inhibits the body's ability to repair DNA.
Every time anyone says mouse models, I immediately think of like a mouse on a catwalk.
Yep.
And you say it out loud every time.
Every time.
Oh, have I? Do I say it
yes.
often? Okay.
Then you tell a joke about other animals who are models. You get as far as Cat Deeley and then you give up.
Oh, I did do that. Blimey. All right. Fair enough. Yeah, you listen to me way more often than I do.
E-cigarette smoke, it causes DNA damage and simultaneously inhibits the body's ability to repair damaged DNA. Now, this indicates
Naomi Campbell?
Oh, for fuck's sake.
You reminded him.
This indicates that long-term exposure may be carcinogenic because it is well established that damaged DNA can lead to mutation, which can lead to cancer.
Yeah.
However, no actual tumours were observed in the mice during this study. Now,
no tumours were harmed in the making of this paper.
They did observe damaged DNA, and we know damaged DNA can lead to cancer, but it's several steps removed from an actual cancer. This study is not without its limitations. So, for example, there were only 20 mice involved in this study, and 10 of those were getting filtered air as a control.
What about koala Delavigne?
Cara and koala sound nothing like each other.
Koala Delavigne is not a bad animal as model
for the faintest.
Koala Delavigne, that's quite funny.
Haven't a clue who you're talking about.
Okay, fine.
She's in
Suicide Squad.
Yeah, she was in Suicide Squad.
Oh, right.
Painted all blue, I think.
That one.
Weird,
She didn't say very much.
Yeah. I know what you mean now.
Koala Delavigne.
Looks nothing like a koala.
Koala.
But this is still early days, and there are good reasons for us to continue to investigate the carcinogenic potential of nicotine vapor. As I say, nicotine's been studied, but nicotine vapor hasn't really been hasn't really been studied as well. And you might think, well, what's the difference between nicotine and nicotine vapor? And if that's the case, think about the difference between water and water vapor.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, one of those can cause severe burns if you breathe it in, and the other one doesn't.
Yeah,
it'll make you drown.
It'll make you drown. It's still pretty bad. Pretty bad. Is it nicotine vapor, or is it nicotine carried on a vapor?
The nicotine is vaporized, and you are inhaling nicotine vapor when you vape.
So it is,
as well as the water vapor that you're getting from the.
So it's not.
Actually, I think it's vegetable glycerin that they use to create the vapor. But
okay. So it's not like you are liquidizing. It's not like pure nicotine.
It's not nicotine gas. It is effectively aerosolized nicotine.
Okay.
So nothing in the paper, however, supports the Metro's characterization of this research as undermining the consensus view that most of the harm from smoking comes from compounds other than nicotine. This is a totally misleading claim. The paper shows no such thing, nor does it claim to show such a thing. It's not even like the paper says it and the Metro is reporting on that. It's just editorializing from the Metro.
Jesus.
Not only that, but the Metro's claim that e-cigarettes are no safer than smoking tobacco might actually be enough to stop a smoker switching to e-cigarettes.
Yeah.
Because, well, if there's no difference, then, you know, I may as well carry on doing what I'm doing. So it's totally irresponsible reporting from
it's abstinence-only smoking, basically. Abstinence-only smoking education.
It's got to be 100% or nothing.
Yeah.
You know, which is ridiculous. This piece from the Metro comes around the same time as another paper on e-cigarettes, which was described by NHS Choices as a landmark study in smoking and e-cigarette research. This paper was titled Nicotine, Carcinogen and Toxin Exposure in Long-Term E-Cigarette and Nicotine Replacement Therapy Users.
I hope in this landmark e-cigarette study they went to like Stonehenge, and then they went to that giant, and they went to the Cliffs of Dover.
Yeah.
It's like, it turns out if you smoke in the Cliffs of Dover, it's marginally worse than smoking at Stonehenge.
This was published in the Annals of Internal Medicine. It was a cross-sectional study and was funded by Cancer Research UK. 181 nicotine users were recruited and divided into 5 groups. Group 1 consisted of people who exclusively used cigarettes to deliver their nicotine fix. Group 2 was people who exclusively used e-cigarettes to deliver their nicotine fix. Group 3 exclusively used some nicotine replacement therapy, such as gum or patches.
Yeah, Group 4 were an outsourced company brought in to handle the security of the entire trial.
Group 4 used both cigarettes and e-cigarettes in conjunction with each other. And Group 5 used both cigarettes and a nicotine replacement therapy. So we got 5 groups, some using nicotine replacement therapy, some using e-cigarettes, some using cigarettes, some using a combination.
Yeah.
In comparing samples of saliva and urine from the participants, the researchers found no difference between the groups for levels of nicotine, which I think is quite interesting, that people who use e-cigarettes do not have higher levels of nicotine than people who smoke. So despite the perception that we've got of people who vape constantly, they're not actually taking on board more nicotine.
Oh, okay, that's interesting.
At least from this study.
Yeah,
I mean, it's 181 nicotine users. It's not like it's thousands of people, but
it's a reasonable start.
Okay. We've got some data here that says that you do not have increased levels of nicotine compared to smokers. But within the vaping and nicotine replacement only groups, they also found significantly lower levels of carcinogenic metabolites associated with smoking. So people who used e-cigarettes have no less nicotine, but have significantly fewer carcinogens, which is what we would expect to see from the basic science, because you're taking on nicotine, but you're not taking on all this other crap that you get from burning leaves.
Yeah.
And so it's what we expected to see. It's what we've said on this show a few times, that just on the basic science alone, this is probably better. And it's great to have this confirmed by a study from Cancer Research UK. Again, there are some limitations here. So the participants are self-selected. It was a cross-sectional study, which is a form of observational study. So this is not a controlled trial, which is something we're probably unlikely to get ethics approval for.
Yeah.
We took 600 people, randomized them into 3 groups. 200 of them smoked 80 a day for 10 years to see how many of them got cancer. I think even the most charismatic scientist would find that a hard sell to even the most gullible of ethics boards.
Yeah.
But also the study's definition of long-term is greater than 6 months, which I don't really think that's long term. I'd have maybe medium term, but I wouldn't have called that a long term study.
Yeah, no, I agree.
So what that meant is that people in group 1 had to have used cigarettes exclusively for their nicotine intake over the previous 6 months. People in group 2 had to have used e-cigarettes exclusively for their nicotine intake over the previous 6 months, and so on. If you had a cigarette in the last 6 months, you were put into we used a mixture group.
That's not too bad, I suppose, because I don't know how long it takes. I don't know what biological difference would have happened to you after you've shifted away from cigarettes and tar into e-cigarettes over the course of 6 months. There are plenty of things that would have ameliorated in your physical performance anyway.
Well, and that's what this study will be measuring.
Yeah.
Is what those differences are.
So 6 months seems reasonable under that condition.
Yeah. So my understanding is that this is the first direct evidence that levels of known carcinogens in the body drop significantly when you manage your nicotine habit with vaping rather than smoking, which is a public health win. And that's why NHS are calling this a landmark study. The study reinforces a report from NHS England which says that e-cigarettes are 95% safer than smoking tobacco, and that despite increased use of e-cigarettes, the rate of nicotine use overall is declining. So e-cigarettes are not recruiting non-smokers. I mean, there are, but it's very, very low levels. It's mostly stealing from the smoking population, and the total number of nicotine users is still declining. Which is good. So vapors are most commonly converted smokers. They're not being drawn from the non-smoking population in any large numbers. That e-cigarettes are safer than tobacco smoke is also the view of the Cochrane collaboration. And despite some initial reluctance, it seems like health authorities in the United States are also coming around to this view as well.
Okay.
Doctors in the UK have been relatively gung-ho on e-cigarettes and have been for a few years saying this is better than smoking. Authorities in the United States have been a bit more circumspect about it, but they're starting to make the same noises that we've been saying in the UK for a while now. So despite the Metro's odd attempts to undermine e-cigarette use, the story actually remains unchanged. On the evidence we have, vaping is safer than smoking tobacco. Not safe, not harmless, safer. And significantly safer. Ideally, people would be avoiding nicotine altogether, but if you want a way to manage your nicotine habit, then vaping is a better way to do it than filling your mouth with burning leaves.
So listeners might remember on episode 178, I talked about the case of Jonathan Bryan, who was a young lad who I think at the time was 9, who had brain damage. He had cerebral palsy from birth, where his mum was in a car accident while he was still in the womb.
Yeah.
He was born early and had brain damage, and at the time the medical technicians who did scans of his brain said it's some of the worst brain damage that they'd seen in any of the cases that they'd come across, and doctors predicted that Jonathan would never be able to walk or eat or feed himself or perhaps even recognise his parents, let alone communicate. And so for many, many years, Jonathan was thought to be non-communicative. And then the story that I covered on the show, episode 178, was that Jonathan was suddenly able to not only recognise and communicate with his parents, but write very eloquent and mature poetry and prose, and was outperforming children in his class and even children in classes way above him when it came to maths. And the way that he was able to do that was using a spelling board where a facilitator would watch the movement of his eyes and spell out words that he was trying to spell by seeing the subtle movement of his eyes towards one letter or another. And this, I pointed out, was called facilitated communication.
Yeah.
And as best as we could tell from a distance, was a pseudoscientific technique. And now, obviously, I haven't met Jonathan. I haven't talked to his facilitator, his parents, or anything like that. But the best that we could tell from a distance was this is so similar to a very well-known and totally discredited form of gaining information from a locked-in, quote-unquote, patient, that it raised some huge troubling concerns.
Sure.
And it actually echoes a case that I think we might have talked about in the show as well, a case of Rom Hubel, who was a coma patient who'd been in a coma for 23 years, thought to be entirely uncommunicative. Sorry, not coma, but non-responsive, rather. And yet his carer, Linda Wouters, would be able to get messages from him by using his right hand and feeling the subtle movement, she would say, of his right hand. She would guide him, or she would be guided by him to keys on a keypad to then spell out messages and again get these quite eloquent messages through.
And we argue that this is essentially is a human planchette.
Exactly, yeah. So our argument would be that the facilitator is involved in this communication. If these aren't genuine messages, if these are pseudoscientific in their origin, the facilitators almost certainly are not intentionally deceiving or defrauding or conning anyone at all, but they're almost certainly falling victim to the ideomotor effect, and that's where their message is being guided from. That's where their messages are coming from, and it's actually coming from them and not the patient. And in fact, in the case of Ron Hubel, this was put to the test. There was a neuroscientist who initially was very excited and very supportive of the idea that these were genuine messages, and he even wrote a paper that was published and was quoted in Der Spiegel and got international recognition. But when there were some criticisms of the method of communication, he went back and conducted tests. And actually testing these kind of things is really pretty straightforward. One of the things you do is you take the facilitator out of the room, you show the patient an object, you bring the facilitator back, and we'll see whether the patient can name the object. And if the patient is able to seemingly name the object when the facilitator was in the room when they were shown it, and isn't able to when the facilitator is out of the room, you have there an indication that it's the facilitator's role in the communication that's important, and not necessarily the patient.
Yes.
And in fact, other tests were carried out that were even more indicative, whereby you'd show the patient, you'd say to the facilitator, this is what we've shown the patient, but you show the facilitator something else entirely.
Yeah.
And then when the communication comes through, it's the facilitator's object that gets named and not the patient's object, which is a very clear sign that this is messaging coming from the facilitator and not the patient. The reason this is relevant in the case of Jonathan is, having seen the videos, it certainly seems like that's what's happening. He actually got his case was actually prominently featured in a number of newspapers actually recently. So the Times wrote an entire article about his communication. The Mail ran another article about it. So we ran one in 2016. They ran another one just last week. And there's actually a CBBC documentary called My Life about Jonathan and the way that he's able to write such kind of eloquent and mature prose and poetry and such and such. That's going to be coming out. That was actually coming out as we're recording tomorrow, the 5th of February. So a couple of days ago now. We haven't seen that documentary. So it's another case of the media failing to understand and ask questions about what's really going on. An incredibly troubling case, and it's something that I've been struggling with over the last week or so since I saw this story, is exactly what to do. And I'm going to be watching the documentary with some interest because, on the one hand, anything we do to intervene can only if there's a number of outcomes here. One is that Jonathan genuinely is able to give these messages. This isn't facilitated communication. This is genuinely communication from a patient thought previously to be non-communicative. And therefore, what we're finding is that from the style of his writing and the fact that 2 years ago when he was 9, he had a very nuanced opinion on Brexit on a referendum that many adults didn't really fully necessarily grasp, but a 9-year-old who had been without education for the majority of his early life apparently was able to grasp. It would show that Jonathan was actually a very perceptive and mature young man. That's option one. Option two is that he isn't able to do these things, and he isn't able to communicate. And if that option two is the case, then what is likely to happen is that his parents would have to come to terms with the fact that they'd lost their son again. They thought he'd never be able to contact. Yeah. They've had years of in contact with him, and now they aren't able to do that. That's an incredibly hard thing to do. And as a skeptic, you don't necessarily even want to get involved in that if you can't see that there's any good can come from that. And that's where it gets thorny, because one of the reasons that Jonathan was featured in the Times and featured in the Mail and featured in the CBBC documentary is because he has a campaign called Teach Us Too, whereby he and his parents are arguing that because Jonathan is able to communicate in these ways when he was thought to be non-communicative, other children and other people in similar situations also would be locked in and just as intellectually rich behind the outward passivity. And therefore, we shouldn't put children we assume to be brain damaged or unable to communicate, unable to learn. We shouldn't put them in special educational needs classes. We shouldn't give them special educational needs care. They should be in regular classes with regular children. And that's what that campaign is doing. Jonathan talks about how he's met with, or rather Jonathan's parent and Jonathan's blog talks about how they've met with MPs. They've been speakers at conferences about this, and they've got a petition with thousands of signatures saying move children with special educational needs out of special classes and into regular. And this, if Jonathan isn't really able to communicate in the ways that he says, and even if Jonathan is and these other children aren't, could do a huge amount of damage to an awful lot of very vulnerable special educational needs children. So I guess we're now in a position where this is why we need to test these things. This is why when the media write about these things, they should be aware of the simple tests that could be carried out. Any facilitators who want to be using these techniques in order to communicate with vulnerable and disabled children should be put to the test first, because we need to know that these methods, we need to know whether they're legitimate or not before we make radical changes to the way we care for and teach children with severe disabilities. So it's an enormously sad and enormously tricky area, but also enormously important, and it's something we'll be continuing to monitor.
So Liverpool Skeptics in the Pub is next Thursday. That's a week today, a week after the show goes out, which is going to be Alice. Yeah. Talking about why we haven't cured cancer yet.
More cancer. If you're not fed up with me talking about cancer already, then come along to the talk.
Is this all more grist to your cancer mill? Like, will stuff you've mentioned today be sort of inserted into your talk, do you think?
It does occasionally. Some of my pieces will add to it. I have got something to add to it before that talk, but probably this won't go in. But it depends on the stuff I cover. Like, it's constantly, I basically add something new every time I give the talk.
Yeah.
Because cancer research is always developing.
Always moves on, always moving on. So that is on the 15th of February from 7:30 p.m. at House on Tithe Barn Street. It is a reschedule of the last time we had Alice down to talk, which was like December time, I think, was it? It was December. Yeah. Which we had to push back to February because of problems with our venue.
Yeah.
So we're in House.
We're in House.
Hence we're having it in House now.
And the food's quite good there. We ate there before Edzard's talk last month,
Yeah.
and the food was quite nice. So it's good to go ahead early and have something to eat.
Have a pan of scouse.
So that's downstairs. That's in the basement bar of House on Tithe Barn Street. So 7:30, 15th of February. You should come along to that. Aside from that, I think that's all we have time for.
I think so.
All that remains then is for me to thank Marsh for having us in his house.
Thank you.
And thank you to Alice.
Thank you.
We've been Skeptics with a K. We will see you next time.
Bye now.
Bye.
Skeptics with a K is a production of the Merseyside Skeptics Society. For more information, visit our website www.merseysideskeptics.org.uk or email podcast@merseysideskeptics.org.uk.